How to Train Your Dragon 3 just came out, and we have been preparing for this for a long time. Ever since we've got battle plans, we've got contingency plans, we've got contingency plans for those contingency plans. And as you can tell by my business suit that I'm wearing, we mean business.
You don't even have any pants!
Shut up! I've got my spoiler notes. Let's get to work. 6 hours later. Also spoilers. Overall thoughts. Whew, well, that's done. The arc of the film is essentially dealing with Hiccup and Toothless's conflict between them wanting to stay together as friends and them needing to step up and become the chief and the alpha that their people need. Grimmel, the antagonist, makes Hiccup realize that dragons will never truly be safe, no matter how many they rescue when it comes to humans. They're just gonna keep hunting them. Because of this, they need to learn to not rely so much on one another, to fly on their own, as it's put, finally coming to a point where they love one another enough to let each other go, so that they can do their duty for their people. It's a story about love and self-sacrifice, and what those two things really mean. That's what Dean and the DreamWorks team set out to do, and they accomplished it. The conflict is the natural conclusion to the previous two films. In the first, it's about Hiccup and Toothless learning to trust one another, the second is about them becoming leaders of their kind, and the third is about grappling with the responsibility and self-sacrifice of being a leader. The story hit me emotionally in ways that the first and the second never really did, particularly in two scenes. Firstly, save him. The scene at the end of the film with Hiccup telling the Light Fury to go save Toothless instead of himself, I think encapsulates Hiccup accepting that Toothless needs to take up his role as the alpha and that he deserves to be with the Light Fury. He deserves to make a life of his own with his own kind. Secondly, the two saying goodbye and Toothless leading the host of dragons away. This was them both growing and maturing to the point that they loved one another enough to let each other go. That was really the only way that I felt and still feel that they could have brought this arc that went across all three films to a satisfying close. It would have felt odd to have done it so that there's a happily ever after where they get to stay together, but also they get to protect all the dragons. I feel like that would have seemed a little bit of a cheat. In all that Dean set out to do, he accomplished it in a visually stunning and emotionally resonant story. What I liked. There were 23 scenes that I counted in my handy dandy Spyro notebook, of which roughly 6 were entirely about Toothless. And what's really cool is that they were some of the most important scenes in the story. Not just about Toothless and Hiccup as a unit, but about Toothless himself as a character. These include him meeting the Light Fury, him realizing that he wants to mate with her, the discovery of the hidden world itself. It is ambitious enough to make a main character that does not talk, but it is even more difficult to put enough emotion and expression into these scenes so that you fully grasp everything that is going on in the action and what the characters are thinking, feeling, and experiencing. This change in perspective is not really something we have seen in the previous two films. Toothless has been communicating, but we've always really understood the story through Hiccup, our human counterpart. And how did Dean and the DreamWorks team meet this challenge? After my second viewing this morning, the script is a bit old. I saw this like a month ago, but I can say with confidence that I still feel that Dean and his team absolutely succeeded. This is clearest in what I feel is probably the most visually stunning scene of the film, if not one of the most visually stunning scenes in the entire series. When Toothless goes in search of the Light Fury and he finds her soaring up in the sky about halfway through the film. And this was because I noticed something that I thought really added to it, just a tiny detail, something that may or may not have been even intentional. We virtually never see the ocean below or the sky above throughout the entire scene. It's virtually all cloud, especially once they fly into the storm. And you have this really strange sense where there's no up or down. You're left with this odd feeling of not really knowing what's above you or below you, and the unique orientation of the camera shots gives you this weightlessness, this experience of flight alongside Toothless and the Light Fury. Not a single word is spoken in this scene with two dragons, but they communicate a lot with just the visuals. How their wings grow closer as they grow closer emotionally, and how the Light Fury teaches Toothless to use his new lightning ability, to be able to vanish in a similar fashion to her. But let's have a chat about Hiccup. I think that his arc in this film is, and I say this tentatively, just as good as his arc in the first film, which I do realise is a high bar. It's a more developed arc than I think he had in the second film. He's learning to let go of Toothless and become a leader that his people need. Volker remarks in just the second scene that I think you rely a little too much on your dragons and not enough on one another. This line very clearly sets up the major theme of the film. It was not really hidden. It was pretty just like, see the theme over there? Anyone? I do. Hiccup, of course, at the beginning of the film laughs this off because he and Toothless are the best team that he could ever have. And he goes further than this. Hiccup resists the notion that he and Toothless will ever separate by ordering the tribe to abandon Berk in hopes of finding the hidden world, that they would all move there together, which Astrid rightly dismisses as a crazy idea. And it's Astrid who ends up being the one that Hiccup has to rely on the most throughout the film because Toothless isn't there. He's off on his own adventure, and through her he learns to rely on his own people more, but also to rely more on himself, to believe in himself. Astrid even remarks in one scene that he thinks he's nothing without Toothless. And that's kind of true. Hiccup has always suffered from low self-esteem, but having Toothless alongside him, he feels like he can actually do something. All of this in the film culminates with Hiccup having to save the day almost entirely without Toothless. He has to use the glider wings that he invented by himself to fly towards Grimmel's fleet. He goes only in with and can only rely on his human friends, and he has to fight Grimmel hand to hand without his dragon. And when he makes the decision to sacrifice himself for Toothless, Toothless is unconscious. So many parts of the climax are just him relying on himself without Toothless, him learning to fly on his own, quite literally when it comes to the glider wings that he uses. The metaphor is pretty obvious, and to my shock, this character change didn't happen too quickly. It felt like a natural progression for Hiccup, with periods of denial, anger, heartbreak, and him coming to the shocking realization when he goes to the hidden world and he sees Toothless leading all of the dragons as their alpha, that he needs to go. And he doesn't say it though. He actually never says it in that scene. We can tell as the audience that he has realized that, but he doesn't want him to, obviously. All he's left with is this empty feeling. And I really like that. Not Hiccup feeling empty and broken and sad, that would make me a bit of a sadist. I mean, I just liked how it was written. And within this arc, there is a wonderful moment about halfway through the film where Hiccup makes Toothless a new tail that allows him to fly on his own, without Hiccup. And he very clearly says that he expects Toothless to just come back. And it's clear in this scene that Astrid realizes that there is a chance that Toothless won't, or that when he does come back, he will want to leave again. But Hiccup doesn't realize that. And I thought that this ignorance, that love is blind element, that he never even considered the prospect, was really relatable. That's a very natural response. It was a well-constructed scene. And it ends in this heartbreaking moment where Hiccup exclaims, "I never expected him to never come back," and Astrid sadly says, "You gave him his freedom." Which is true. The emotional weight behind the film was grounded and real and relatable, as well as being realistic. It didn't feel contrived. Another strong point for the writing of the film is its antagonist, Grimmel the Grizzly. Now, I've talked on this channel about how excellent villains have to be the necessary opponent of the hero, and Grimmel is that for Hiccup. The reason that he can hurt Hiccup and Toothless in a way that the Red Death from the first film or Drago Bloodfist never could in the second is that he tells Hiccup very early on, "I am the Night Fury killer." That he killed off all of Toothless's kind, immediately setting up an intimate dynamic between the two, between the hero and the villain. There's already a sense of history there in a weird way that we didn't have before. It's unlike how Hiccup really got in the way of the Red Death, or he got in the way of Drago Bloodfist. In other words, if Hiccup never really sought out the villain, then they would have never met. Grimmel is going after Hiccup and Toothless. He wants to go after the last Night Fury. There is a personal investment in trying to kill Toothless, and that makes that dynamic between them a lot more interesting. He tries to get to know Hiccup and Toothless and their weaknesses, working to separate them from one another, and he repeatedly tells him, "You are nothing without your dragon," playing into his character arc. The Red Death was just a monster that didn't consider Toothless or Hiccup personally, and Drago was concerned with world domination more than anything else. But Grimmel's personal vendetta against Hiccup makes their conflict a lot more intense and a lot more dangerous. A common pitfall for writing villains is not establishing how big a threat they are to the hero, or just telling us that they're a big threat, or even worse, telling us they're a big threat, but the protagonists still beat them at every turn, meaning that we're just left feeling like we're facing a Teletubby with anger issues. But what I noticed, what I really liked, was that Dean, the writer and director, used 3 great scenes to establish Grimmel as an antagonistic threat unlike one we've ever seen before in the series. Firstly, in his opening scene, he calmly and easily takes down a massive rumble horn with a single tranquilizer. Secondly, when Hiccup springs the first trap to capture him at the house, Grimmel outsmarts them and leaves Burke burning at the end of the first act. Thirdly, Hiccup once again tries to capture Grimmel by raiding his camp at the end of the second act. But once again, Grimmel outsmarts him, and they only just manage to escape. And they also lose Roughnut at the same time. She doesn't die, as you'll probably know if you've seen the film, but she does just get turned into a prisoner for a while. It is only in the third act, and only with great sacrifice, that Hiccup manages to beat Grimmel. If we contrast this to Drago Bloodfist, not only do we not meet Drago till about 2/3 of the way through the film, but he only really has one big victory, the one at Vulca's Mountain, and that was largely due to his Bewilderbeast. Grimmel was the only one that could force Hiccup to realize that they needed to let their dragons go. That he needed to let Toothless go. Some smaller things that are always amazing are like the animation. Interestingly, it didn't have as many sweeping cinematic shots like the first two did. Like in the second, there are a lot of wide open spaces and wide panning shots of gorgeous scenery. There are a couple of new islands in the third film, the Storm and Burke, but most of the scenes are actually very small. They're in enclosed areas or they're inside, which I kind of liked. I don't know if this was intentional, but I felt like it played into the smaller scale of the story compared to the first and the second. The score by John Powell, as always, was fantastic. It had a great villainous theme that was probably the most recognizable new piece of music in the film, but they also had a lovely rework of the original How to Train Your Dragon theme. But we do have to discuss the core of the film and Toothless's role in it, as Alpha Daddy. And you know who else is an Alpha Daddy? Supreme Leader Mishka. All hail Mishka, right? This might be one of the last times Mishka's actually in a video for a little while. I'll tell you a bit later. Something that I found really funny was that the Light Fury literally made bed eyes at Toothless in the scene where they meet. But what was really nice in the romance was that it was quite animalistic. I was a bit worried because there's a tendency to use kind of human tropes, human romantic things to explore the love stories between animals. Think like Lady and the Tramp and them chewing the spaghetti towards one another. Actually, hang on, do humans do that? That sounds absolutely revolting. Like, how would you even do that? Usually you get them in like huge wads. Can you imagine, like, them both chewing on the same wad? I'm getting distracted. But, you know, there were mating dances, and she was quite reactionary at times, and he didn't know how to approach it, and there were moments of kind of more human-type things, like in the scene where they're in the sky and their wings touch. It's meant to be like, we hold hands, but obviously birds don't really do that, I don't think. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like a drawing on humans holding hands. Oh, he just wants to be held. He keeps on going around my feet and I might be tripping up. We also learned that Night Furies mate for life, which they kind of had to do, because it'd be a bit disappointing to sort of just be like, yeah, they had kids and now she's off again. That wouldn't be as fun. One of the best moments of the entire film was where Toothless drew her face in the sand, and the reason that I really liked it was that he actually growled at her quite aggressively when she tried to stand on it, which was just kind of subversive. You know, you sort of expect Toothless to be entirely bewildered by her in every possible way, but it sort of puts them on a bit of equal footing that he growled at her and that she sort of respected him, because it meant that he had a chance to respect her and her boundaries and learn her ways, and she had a chance to come to understand him and respect him. And I liked that. It was a two-way relationship, which we often don't see, where you've got kind of this, why do you keep wanting to lean back? Oh, you're so cute. Oh, but the art was just a masterpiece. Da Vinci, I say. And those are really the big points of things that I liked in the film. There were lots of small things, but we don't really have time to get on all of those. Things I didn't like. A shorter list, but a list nonetheless. And these aren't really things that I actively disliked, but things that I felt could have been done better, maybe. There was one scene that had some jarring or strange dialogue for Hiccup, where he says, I don't trust the Light Fury, she never comes around and she's so wild. It's obviously meant to be comedic because it plays into how mums treat their daughters and their sons, making Hiccup into the mum of sorts of Hiccup. But the moment is played as serious and Astrid reacts seriously, and he knew that the Light Fury was wild and the delivery was a little bit off. It just seemed a little bit odd, because we've never really seen Toothless's relationship with Hiccup to be one of mother to son or father to son, and he's never really expressed these sentiments before, and he doesn't ever express these sentiments again. It was kind of like Jay Baruchel knew that it was meant to be comedic, but he was trying to deliver it seriously. This paranoia just seemed to come out of nowhere for Hiccup and then vanishes. The second thing would be the character arcs of the supporting characters, in particular Snotlout Jorgensen and Toughnut Thorsten. Firstly, Snotlout. All throughout the series there has been this rivalry between Hiccup and Snotlout. He thinks he's a better leader, or he thinks he's a better fighter, or he thinks he's a better strategist. He's obnoxious and he finds it difficult to work with others, and this character flaw is made clear in the opening scene where he boasts to Volker about how amazing his attacks were and how he didn't need anyone else and how he was the best person on the team, and we saw that he disobeyed Hiccup's orders. This was also the scene that set up a couple of other character arcs, Hiccup's as well as the major theme of the film. Given the film is about growing up and maturing, I thought these scenes were setting up a moment for Snotlout to grow up and mature, to become less obnoxious, to learn to work well with others. For example, Snotlout and Hiccup have a very similar rivalry in the books, and in the end, Snotlout sacrifices himself for Hiccup, realizing that the world needs Hiccup as a leader. The film may have benefited from that moment of self-reflection. Secondly, there was a similar issue with Roughnut and Toughnut. The raid in the opening scene has them all struggling to work together, even Roughnut and Toughnut who fight on the same dragon. They don't trust or think of one another enough to be an effective team. And there is a point later on in the film where Toughnut accidentally leaves Roughnut behind during a raid on Grimmel's base. And Astrid scolds him right after that, "You didn't even notice your sister was gone." I thought this bitter sibling rivalry was clearly going to culminate in them realizing that they needed to support and trust one another, and that the combined efforts of the twins in the final battle would be stronger than either one of the two of them alone, which is how they were acting throughout the movie. But nothing along those lines ever happens. Tough Nut has a clear character flaw that he needs to overcome, but he never does in a film about maturing, which I found odd. Once again, the film could have benefited from a moment of self-reflection, just a resolution of a character arc that they seemed to set up throughout the entire film, and then just never finish off. And all it would have required is a 20-second scene in the final battle where each of the twins are hard pressed into a corner fighting alone. Tough Nut just manages to escape, but he realizes his sister is still cornered. He goes back and they fight their way free together, with her saying, "I thought you forgot about me." And he says, "I could never forget about you, sis, even if you don't have a memorable thick beard like me." And they manage to beat the enemies that they couldn't beat alone. Voila! Character arc finished. Now, the Light Fury design, I said in my spoiler-free review that I came to like it, but after a while of thinking about it, I feel like that was me just being a bit excited. You know, you're more likely to just love things. You don't think about the flaws necessarily when you watch a film for the first time. I still would have preferred a darker grey design with navy grey or a patterned look. You know, kind of like tattoos. I reckon that would have been kind of cool. Not actual tattoos, it just kind of looks a little bit like that. It would have gone with how wild and strange she was, the call of the wild personified. While the Light Fury is very slender and feminine, I grew to accept it, but I'm not sure I would have designed it that way myself. So that remains unchanged for me. Final thoughts. I gave it 4.5 dead clones last time, and I'm mostly going to stand by that, with 4.25 clones. Better than the first film, but not quite nearly as good as the second, or films like The Lord of the Rings, or The Matrix. What I want to know is how many dead clones out of 5 do you give it? Let me know down in the comments below. Tell me your thoughts on the film. I was going to say something. Yes, I was going to tell you about Mishka. So I'm moving out. I'm moving to a new place, so all of this is going to change. I'm terrified, but it's going to be fun. It's a new thing. I'm going to have a whole new studio, because this is my room. My computer's there, my bed's there, you know, wardrobe's over there. You've probably seen it in a few videos. But I'm going to be moving into a place where I have a whole studio in my house. Not like an actual studio. I've got to get lighting and stuff, but it means I'm going to be moving away from Mishka. Which, you know, it's not easy. But I mean, I'll put up a video about that or something another time. Anyways, yeah. Next time you see this, it'll be an entirely different background. Probably. Stay nerdy, and I'll see you in the future.